I still haven't shared all of my personal experiences yet, although I do intend to. This is both due to still building up the courage to think back at some of them and just simply find the inspiration required to put them in print. So the story I will share now is actually from my fiancé. Let's call him K, but I do find it really intriguing. I know his story is true as I saw the fear in his eyes when he was thinking back about this. He is also a very honest and caring person. Around 10 years ago, K got in trouble at work and ended up needing to find another job. At the time, he was living in another province than where he was originally from, so when facing a quick end to the stable income, he had no nearby family to turn to and ended up crashing with a friend for a while figuring out what to do next. This friend was living with a girlfriend quite far out on the countryside of Udon Thani. Their house was a typical Thai two-story building with a big dining area, living room on the ground floor, and a sleeping loft above. It was located at the end of a small dirt road with no other buildings or people nearby. Upon first arriving to the house, Kay noticed various children's toys, such as dolls, plastic cars, etc., spread out all around the house and the property. He found this very strange as he was completely unaware of his friend having any children, so naturally, he asked him about this right away. "Oh, so you have a child?" His friend laughed and said, No, those are for the Kuman thong." For those of you who have never heard of a Kuman thong, from ancient times, the Kuman thong has been used in Thailand as a household divinity. It is common belief that keeping a Kuman thong in your house brings good luck and fortune. All you need to do is to buy one and then keep it happy by offering it toys and sweet treats. For most people, to buy this would probably be to spend a small fortune, but it is very common in Thai culture to spend an incredible amount of money on such things as altars, amulets, or tattoos of good fortune. Even if you don't really have the money, it will probably come back to you with all the luck it will bring. The Kuman thong is the trapped spirit from an unborn child. This child, having died so early or suddenly, is unable to reincarnate. Therefore, monks or witch doctors practicing black magic are able to trap the spirit and use it for their own benefit. This originates from the practice of necromancy. The Kuman thong is created from a human fetus removed from the mother's womb before birth. In a horrifying ritual that includes roasting the feet dry at a cemetery, ceremonial chanting, and sometimes even to soak it in oil extracted from the skin of a dead child or a person who died in violent circumstances or an unnatural death. If you ask a Thai person, they would probably tell you that the Kuman thong was more likely made from the killing of the fetus and sometimes the mother than from a stillborn. How can anyone live with this being a source of your happiness or luck is beyond me. I find it sickening to imagine keeping a spirit of an innocent child trapped rather than supporting them to move on. Back to the story. Kay is very religious and a very spiritual person, but never really believed in these particular sorts of legends or witchcrafts. He dismissed the whole thing as quite bizarre and frankly thought his friend was a bit off for keeping toys in the house for this reason. The first evening he spent in the house, they were all enjoying barbecue with more than a few beers to follow. When they finally went to bed, Kay was sleeping on a mattress on the ground floor, while his friend and the girlfriend had their bedroom upstairs. After a few hours of sleep, Kay suddenly woke up. He distinctly heard the sound of small, quick feet running up and down the stairs. Kay, being a big guy, bodybuilder and Muay Thai trainer, wasn't easily afraid of many things, but this really made him freeze in bed, listening as all the small steps kept running quickly up and down the stairs and across the floor above. Naturally, his thoughts went to the little altar with the Kuman thong and he was really frightened. Eventually, he still managed to convince himself that it was only some sort of animal making the sound and thus he was able to fall asleep again. The following morning, he mentioned the sounds to his friend, but the friend just shrugged it off. Yes, we have the Kuman thong, I already told you." And it seemed that this didn't bother him in any way. He clearly had no problem with this, as he knew the Kuman thong was there to protect and bring luck to the household. He had willingly, knowingly invited it. Kay didn't understand how something so terrifying could be shrugged off so easily, but being in full daylight and knowing that he had been quite drunk the night before, he decided not to let it bother him. That same night, he went to bed without having any drinks before, but yet again woke up to the sound of footsteps. The steps were too quick and light to be from an adult, and Kay knew that there was only him, his friend, and the girlfriend in the house. Furthermore, houses in cities in Thailand were usually connected and built very closely, enabling sounds to travel between homes. But this house was completely freestanding, with no chance of the sound coming from a neighbor. Kay even went around the house looking for tree branches and the like that could make the sounds, but came up with nothing. This continued every night and things seemingly started to escalate. Kay was terrified, but desperate situations calls for desperate measures, and so he chose to stay. He tried for many nights to shut out the sound of the child's running, but could not ignore the toys that would be moved to different places in the morning. Sometimes he even heard the toy cars outside being rolled across the yard. One night, he clearly heard the sound of a child's laughter coming from the very room he was sleeping in. Terrified and unable to move, he stayed in bed all night waiting for the sun to rise. The sound of feet running and cheeky children's laughter kept on going all night. When the morning finally came, Kay packed up his belongings and left. There are many weird traditions in different cultures, but for me, this one isn't something that can be easily understood. I wonder if this really is the child's spirit or if something else is captured during the ritual. If it is a child, then I really wish that someday these poor spirits are freed. Even if they are cared about and prayed to as if there's something divine, this surely can't be their place. This was when my family still lived in Thailand. I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. My older sister, who was 7 at the time, had a friend that went to our school too. Let's call her Mina. She only lived about 2 blocks away from our house, so every morning either Mina came to our house or we went to her house and then walked to school together. Mina came over to our house a lot and knew where my sister and I slept. I normally sleep with my grandma and my sister slept with my parents. One day, Mina got very sick and died in her bed. During her funeral, my sister went to see her. My parents didn't allow me to go as I was still too young. I was also too scared to go too. When my sister came back from the funeral, she said that Mina's eyes were opened. Her mom tried to close them, but they would just open right back. There were some rumors saying that Mina's mom didn't care to check on her when she was sick. They also said that Mina was calling for her mom before she died. That night, after my sister came back from the funeral, my sister went to sleep with my grandma and I slept with my parents. My baby brother was also sleeping with my parents, so they covered the bed with a plastic sheet in case he peed on the bed. If someone steps on the bed, you can hear the noise of someone stepping on plastic. It was about midnight when I heard footsteps on the bed. I thought it was my parents, so I opened my eyes and saw that my parents were still asleep. I looked towards the end of the bed and saw a blue light and a humanly figure. I got very scared and quickly pulled the blanket over my head. After a while, I fell asleep. In the morning, I told my parents and my grandma of what I saw last night. My parents went to check outside and said that there were weird footprints around our house. My grandma said that it must be Mina coming to say goodbye to my sister, as she knew my sister usually slept with my parents. In September 2005, I was studying at Derby University for a bachelor's degree in tourism. As part of my dissertation, I was looking into the effects of the tsunami and the socio-economic impact on the area of Krabi in Thailand, a popular tourist destination. I had a close relationship with a Thai family who previously lived in the UK, and it was arranged for me to go and stay with them. John, the father of the family, was English, and Dum was the mother of the family. She was Thai. They had 2 children, a girl, let's call her Cassie, and a boy called Freddie. Cassie would have been around 5 years old at the time, and Freddie was about 2.5. On arrival to Thailand, I was greeted at the airport by the whole family, and Cassie presented me with a small garland of flowers, which I thought was really sweet. I was absolutely exhausted from traveling and do not remember the journey to their home very well. I remember it was about 4 p.m. in the afternoon when I arrived at their bungalow and I had to excuse myself to go to bed. During the night, I woke up. I don't know what time it was, but I was feeling very uneasy, almost like I was being watched. The net curtains in the room were swaying frantically, and I remember a feeling of sadness. Usually this would stop me from sleeping, but I was so sleepy that I just drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling much better after some rest and was able to get a proper catch-up with my friends, who I had not seen for almost 3 years. Dum asked me how I slept, and I announced that I slept very well, not wanting her to know how uneasy the feeling was in the room. I thought nothing of this and got showered and got ready to spend the day with Dum, whilst John stayed home and looked after the children. In my room, I had lots of sweets and presents for the children which were on my bed. I was planning to give it to them later that day. Around 3:30 p.m., I arrived back at the bungalow with Dum, and John was sitting outside on the porch. He had a very worried expression on his face and asked to speak with myself and Dum alone. He said that he had caught the children messing around in my room, trying to eat the sweets and stuff, so he had locked the door. Only later, he noticed that they were still hovering around the door, trying to unlock it and talking to something in the room. Cassie informed him that someone was in there and she needed to go check and see if they were okay. John was thinking that this was just a ploy to get at the sweets and told them to go and play somewhere else and behave. About an hour before we came home, he was sitting on the porch when he heard a low voice say, "Cassie, come here." This came from the room where I was staying. Cassie had come outside and asked her dad who had called her, which had alarmed John as he had also heard it. John was not the kind of man to be shaken up by things like this. However, there was no way anyone could have been behind the bungalow at the time or gotten into the room without John seeing, as the passageway behind is blocked up and the room was locked. The other strange thing about it was that the voice was speaking in English, and the bungalow where they were renting was a residential area, predominantly Thai. He said the voice he had heard radiated through the house. The children thought it came from my bedroom, but when we went in and spoke, even loudly, nothing could be heard from the front porch. Dum, being a Buddhist and also a believer in ghosts, called to arrange for local monks to come and bless the house, believing that something was very wrong indeed. We all packed our bags and went to stay in a nearby hotel for the night. They then contacted the people who they were renting the bungalow from that evening to relay events, only to find out that it had been previously owned by an English family with 2 daughters, one of which passed away in the tsunami, and the parents had returned to England without managing to find the body. They also admitted to me that both Cassie and Freddie would not settle in that room, which is why they were sleeping in the small room together instead of separate rooms. The next day, the monks came to bless the house and left a string of orange rope around for protection and also brought a spirit house, which is what many Buddhists have in their home to look after the spirits. I did not actually stay in the bungalow again after that night, as I felt very uneasy. I chose to stay in hotels as they were very reasonably priced. John and Dom have since moved back to the UK and the children are much older. We never spoke about what happened again. While I was at the parking lot behind my office building, I was getting to my car to go to lunch with some colleagues. As I was about to enter the car, I heard someone calling my name out loud. It was a familiar voice, but I was the only one in that area at the time. I looked up and saw that there was no one there, which was rather strange because I swear I heard a voice just merely a few seconds ago, and it couldn't have been more than 2 meters away from me, but there really was no one there. It wasn't weird, the fact that no one was there, because normally only a few cars park there every day and all of them were still in the office except for me. I decided to let it go and just not pay any attention to it. But then, as I was shutting the door and started the engine, I heard the same voice call me again. This time, it was right next to my door, and I didn't see anyone. It was impossible for me to have not caught the person in that time since the voice came from just outside my door. Nobody could have run that fast, and there wasn't a lot of space to hide anyways. I decided to get out of my car and looked around. I knew that whoever the voice belonged to, it was impossible for them to have been there. I am used to strange things happening to me. It happens randomly, so I never know what to expect. So I got back into the car again just to realize that 5 minutes had passed and I still have yet to leave for lunch with my colleagues. I started the car, and as soon as I closed the door, I heard the same voice calling me again. This time louder, and I knew that something wasn't right. I went to lunch and didn't tell anyone about this. Besides, if I was to tell them, they wouldn't have believed me anyways. So I went back to work, and because it was a Friday, I totally forgot about the situation completely until Monday afternoon when I met the HR manager. Since I am close with her, we talked for a while. I asked her about a colleague who I haven't seen for a while, and she informed me that he had passed away a few weeks ago when I was away from my vacation. I never knew anything about his passing. I was almost shocked and didn't say anything to her until the next day. It was the voice of this dead colleague that was calling me. I don't get scared by these things anymore, mainly because it keeps reoccurring in my life. But the sad part about my deceased colleague is that he was just recently married and died from a car accident only 10 days after their marriage. He was a good person and worked very hard, and I guess he called out my name because he owed me money and never gave it back to me. It wasn't a big deal, and I never thought much about it, but I guess it was important to him. He has tried to give it back to me, but I was never free to wait for it. I hope that he rests in peace. This happened a while ago when my family and I were in our car and on our way to a family friend's house. They lived outside the city, and there weren't that many houses out there. It was pretty dark outside, but surprisingly warm. On our way there, we saw a girl about my age walking along the road in the middle of the night by herself. My parents were pretty worried that something might have happened to her, so they were thinking they might as well ask if she wanted a lift to wherever she was heading to, since we had one seat left, which was right next to me. My dad stopped the car to where she was at, and my parents offered to give her a lift. I thought she was going to say no, since many parents tell their children to be careful of strangers. But to my surprise, she said yes and hopped in right next to me. Now there was something very weird and strange about her. She had long brown hair tied back very neatly, and she was wearing clothing that looked posh but also looked like they were from the late 1900s. Her body looked terribly pale, and she had scratches on her, and not to be rude, but there was a smell coming from her. I was telling myself not to stare at her because I knew how rude that would have been, but somehow I just couldn't stop myself. There was just something really strange about the girl sitting next to me that gave me goosebumps and made the hair on my neck raise. While I was trying to move around properly in my seat, my arm accidentally brushed against hers. What I experienced from that was that she was terribly freezing. It was like touching ice. She didn't even seem to notice me at all staring at her, since she was just staring straight ahead. My parents tried asking her questions like what she was doing out in the middle of the night all by herself, but the girl didn't really seem to answer. She just kept looking straight ahead. So my parents just gave up asking. My sister was sitting at the back of the car right next to me on my left. She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't really tell what it was because she just kept pointing and making faces like she was really scared of the girl too. Then, when we parked right outside the girl's house, my parents made me get out the car to open the door for her, so I did what I was told. When I got out of the car, I looked around to find nothing around but a really old house that seemed to be from the late 1900s. When the girl got out of the car, she walked right up to her house without knocking the door or even opening the door. She went right through it. That's when I started to freak out and screamed and got into the car really quick, telling my parents to drive off fast to our friend's house. On our way there, my parents asked me what on earth was wrong with me because it looked like I just saw a ghost. I told them I actually did and that the girl that we just picked up, she was a ghost. But they told me I was probably just making it up. To my surprise, someone in my family did actually believe me. It was my sister. She told me that that's what she was trying to tell me all along. What do you think I saw? Do you think I was just probably going nuts? I am really confused about this experience. Yeah, so am I.